Hello and welcome back to the PetsApp webinar series. For those of you thinking, what is Steven Seagal doing here? I've got to just remind you that the barbers are closed, and with 3 under 5, I've decided shaving is entirely optional, but it is still me, your host, Tom Jenkins, and I'm joined by the wonderful Dr. Jessica Vogelstang, who is a veterinarian in San Diego, also a best-selling author and a communications consultant. And also, Jessica, the way I think I came across you for the first time was in 2020. You started a very popular Facebook group on telemedicine. Can you start off by telling us a bit about that?
Yeah, so I've been a fan of telemedicine for 4 or 5 years, and I actually started a Facebook group in 2018 because I wanted people to have a place, to get together. But I only had 2 members for 2.5 years, and so in March I let people know, hey, what do you think about this? Would you like to start talking about telemedicine in this group? And in the span of 3 weeks, we had, I think, about 3,000 members. So interest has skyrocketed, and it was great to have that Facebook group to facilitate.
It's a great community. It's a great community. Some great ideas shared on there. Today, you're going to be talking to us about something a bit different, the irresistible magic of storytelling. And before I just hand over to you, just a reminder to everyone, please put your questions either in the chat or in the Q&A, and there'll be time for me and Jessica to have a chat after her presentation. That's enough from me. Cheers, Jessica.
All right. So thank you so much. Thank you for everybody for joining us today. I'm going to go ahead and get my screen up there. If you are not seeing this, Tom, let me know because I don't have any ability to see that. Okay, perfect. All right, everybody. So let's start with our story. Once upon a time. That's the best way to start any lecture, isn't it? Once upon a time in 1968. A United States Senator named Robert F. Kennedy went to South Africa at the height of apartheid to give what was to become known as the Day of Affirmation speech, where he said this: "Comfort is not the road history has marked out for us. There's a curse which says, may he live in interesting times. And like it or not, we live in interesting times." Now, growing up, I understood that there was a difference between good interesting and bad interesting, and I was very excited to be living in what I consider to be good interesting times. It was the 1990s. I was going to college in Los Angeles. That was a great time to be alive. But as we know, history is a wheel, and what goes around comes around. So let's start our story actually a little bit further back, and we're going to go to what I consider another good interesting time. So in 1444, a metalsmith named Johannes Gutenberg had this epiphany. So he was making hammers and whatever other sorts of things he was doing at the time and said, instead of making weaponry, I could make a letter, like just one letter, and start putting it together and have this thing where I could make a book. Wouldn't that be cool? And he invented the printing press. Now, before this, the creation of books was a very expensive, labor-intensive process. Basically, you had to hire a monk who would write one by hand, and they were very beautiful, but also very expensive. And why was this rather simple piece of engineering so revolutionary? It's because of what we did with it. It did democratize knowledge. That's kind of how we refer to it. So it allowed this spread of information out of the hands of the wealthy and the powerful and just a very few, and allowed people to share it with everyone. This was such a powerful moment in history that most historians said it was one of the reasons that we came out of the Dark Ages. An incredibly amazing, interesting time to be alive. And here we are now. We are experiencing what I would say is another sort of break in the dam when it comes to the flow of information. As medical professionals, we no longer have this wall between our patients and their data. And why is that? Right? Because of the internet. Veterinary medicine has always approached change the same way, right? It doesn't matter whether it's a new phone or a computer or something else. You see this dam and you see a hole in the dam, and they go and they try and plug it. So that's kind of where we are right now. People are trying to plug the internet and control this flow of information. And as we know, this is probably not going to be working out so well. We are living right now in a time of fundamental change in the practice of medicine. And so what we're going to do is look at that in the context of story, because I think it really helps understand why plugging the dam is a bad idea and why there's some better options that we can be using. So to understand how the internet altered the history and the story of veterinary medicine, you need to know exactly what I mean when I'm actually talking about the word story. There's an author named Donald Miller. He's a great marketer, and he wrote a book called Building a Story Brand. And what he does is take the basic tropes of storytelling and the hero's journey and applies it to your business and in building a brand. But really, it applies to everything in life, not just your business, but how we relate to each other. And before you start to tell your story, you need to know these basic archetypes and why we keep repeating them, because they're very effective. So the idea of the hero's journey repeats itself in so many of these epic adventures that we love. It works for Harry Potter, it works for Star Wars, and my personal favorite, and the one that I'm going to use to illustrate the hero's journey, The Lord of the Rings. So the hero's journey looks like this. You have your hero. In this case, it was Frodo. And he has a problem, right? He has this evil ring that he needs to get rid of before it destroys the entire world. Your hero meets a guide, in this case, a Gandalf the wizard, who gives him a plan. He says, look, you got to take this ring, you got to take it to Mordor, and you got to throw it in a volcano. The hero gets a call to action. So it's Gandalf showing up at his front door and saying, hey, there's some ring wraiths on their way to kill you. You got to get going. Go head out on your journey. And so he embarks out on this journey with the help of the guide. And either he's going to succeed or he's going to fail. Like there's really only two options here. These stories help us make sense of the world around us because they contextualize everything that we see around us. And it creates this battle, this binary for good and evil. And as humans, we are hardwired to want our hero to succeed, right? We're automatically very aversive to the idea of failure. We don't want that. I don't know if any of you are fans of Game of Thrones. It was popular until I think like the last season or so. But season 1, right? We had our hero, Ned Stark, and everybody thought this was going to follow the basic arc here, right? Your hero succeeds in his journey. And season 1 ended with his head getting chopped off. That was not something that people enjoyed, right? So that is not the hero's journey that you tell if you want people to really feel good about the story that we're telling. So we can use this. We can use the hero's journey and where we want to go and how we want to succeed to position ourselves in our story of veterinary medicine. The fundamental arc of a good story is this. The hero has a problem. The guide helps them solve it. And you'll hear me repeat this over and over because it is fundamental to everything that we are going to be talking about today. The hero has a problem, and the guide is the difference between success and failure. And the problem that so many veterinarians have when we are talking to our clients, we position ourselves as the hero in this story, but that's not what clients want. Clients want us to be the guide. And when you do it that way, it changes everything. So this becomes our framework. The client has a problem and you help them solve it. Right? This is the essential message that we need to get across. And when you look at people's websites and how they talk about what they do and why they do it, so many people are missing it. If it doesn't tell this story, it's not something that you should be sharing. The client is the hero. This is fundamental to everything when it comes to how we look at ourselves and how we relate to our clients. If you don't position the client as the hero in the story you're telling, who do they become? if they don't get to be Frodo, if they don't get to be the hero, they're relegated to the place of Sam, right? They're the sidekick. And Sam's a great character, don't get me wrong, but nobody wants to be Sam, right? It's not the thing that compels people. So you want the client to be the hero of this story. So let's talk for a minute about the story of veterinary medicine that we have been telling for the past 50 years or so. So look, James Herriot's a great guy, right? Good veterinarian, a wonderful storyteller. But unfortunately, he sort of created this narrative that we've been stuck with for the last half century. People want us to be James Herriot, right? And the story is so compelling. It sort of seared itself into this collective conscience. And the public expects us to live up to the standard of this man who is not even real. Like, if you guys know the story of James Herriot, his name wasn't James Herriot. It was Elf White. He didn't actually practice in the 1940s. He practiced in the 1960s, but we thought the 40s was a little bit better for storytelling purposes. His stories were composites. They weren't even real people. He took little bits and elements in order to tell the story that he wanted to, but those clients didn't actually exist. So how can we live up to this expectation when even the guy who wrote the story didn't live it? But that's what we're stuck with, because it's the story that people want to hear. When I wrote All Dogs Go to Kevin, the first draft of the story was honest. I told life exactly as I experienced it. And the publisher who approached me to publish the book said, you know what, never mind. And so I went back and I had to retool so much of it in order to think more about this framework and how people felt when they read it. And as soon as I did that, we had, I think, 6 or 7 publishers bidding on the book, because it is all about the story. So let's talk about the story of veterinary medicine as told by James Herriot. So you have your hero, right? In this case, it was like a farmer, because he practiced out in the rural areas. The character has a problem. Maybe his cow got sick. So he calls on the good doctor, Dr. James, please come out and take care of this. He gives him a plan. This was sort of the pre-antibiotic era, so there really weren't a lot of things that you could do at the time, but that was fine. Things were simpler back then. And here's his call to action, right? There was a lot of bartering involved. Maybe there was some jam involved, some eggs, all those sorts of things. And then either the animal got better or he didn't, right? It was one or the other. And this was the story that he told, and it was heartwarming and people loved it, and it was so wonderful and great. So fast forward for about 50 years or so. So now we're up to the mid-90s, and our relationship to animals changed in the intervening times, right? Medicine got better. We started to view animals more like family. Things got a little more complicated. So now you have somebody who's been reading All Creatures Great and Small for years, and they love the story. They come to the vet with their dog. Their dog is sick. They love this dog. They want you to do everything. So they come to you and you say, great, I can help your diabetic dog. We need to do these diagnostics. We need to do these tests. Here's all the stuff I'm going to do. It's a little more complicated than it was in 1945. And the client's still trying to interact with you as if it was back then, right? They want to do the same plan, even though the problem has completely changed. So there's a little bit of tension there, but nonetheless, we were able to work through it, right? They begrudgingly would go along with our plan. And again, either the pet would get better or the pet wouldn't. So even though it was a little bit of a struggle sometimes to help convince people that in 1995, our medicine was a little different than it was back then, we were still able to muddle through it because the fundamental relationship was still the same. The client has a problem, you help them solve it. Now, I was hoping that we could get away from James Herriot, right? It's been, 70 years now, but I hear that the BBC has just rebooted it. So we're back at square one. That's fine. It is a lovely story. And at the center of it, you have the veterinarian. The veterinarian is the guide, the source of information, all of your advice and differentials and all the medicine funneled through that trusted relationship. So that continued all the way to about 2000 or so, when we began to live in a very interesting time. So let's hope this works. This was a commercial that was aired, I think, in 1998 that talked about this newfangled thing. It was going to be super exciting, called the internet.
We're riding on the internet, cyberspace, set free. Hello, virtual reality. Interactive appetite, searching for a website, a window to the world, got to get online. Take a spin, now you're in with the techno set. You're going surfing on the internet.
Oh man, we were so naive, right? It's basically an online encyclopedia. It's going to be so much better than the TV, this nice, safe place for children. That's not quite how it worked out. Nonetheless, what happened, the internet became the modern day printing press, right? It was like the printing press on steroids. It wasn't just one book. It was the entirety of human knowledge now available to people. So I was in school in 2000. I was in veterinary school. I started in 1998, still kind of in the analog era, and I graduated in 2002, right when this was starting to take off. And nobody was prepared for what was going to happen. So as a new grad, I didn't know what was about to come. I walked into a room, everybody had said, you're going to go in there, you give them the diagnostics, and they're going to do what you tell them. But that's not what happened. People started coming in with tomes of things that they had printed, right? Because this is still pre-smartphone. They would print things off of Bing and Yahoo, and it was all this like weird stuff. We had no clue. This was very disruptive to our model. Like, I'm the guide. You're supposed to do what I tell you. What happens when people start crowdsourcing their diagnosis? And you hear this on the human side as well. You walk in there, you tell them what's going on, the results of the test, and they say, hang on a minute, and they go and they throw it to the crowd. Do you agree with this? This was not exactly something, right, that most people were thrilled about. If we look at how most veterinarians reacted to this new relationship when clients were questioning us and they had all this information that we didn't give to them, were we happy about it? No, we didn't encourage it. Okay, you guys are a UK crowd. I hope you get this. It's like 50-50 in the States, whether people understand the Monty Python reference, but we were not thrilled when people came to us with all this new information. We did not encourage this collaboration as part of our story. But the internet, it's the dam, right? You cannot put the genie back in the bottle. This completely changed the way that we practice medicine. This idea of paternalistic medicine is never going to work. It's gone. We need to get over that, right? If you tell a client not to Google symptoms, does that ever work? Absolutely not. Like, that's the first thing they do. And that's exactly the first thing we do too. I cannot tell you how many things I've misdiagnosed myself with by going on WebMD. It's just human nature. And look, the democratization is actually not a bad thing. It's good when people have more information, even if we think they don't know what to do with it. The printing press, as we saw, that began the Renaissance. And in the human side, when people have access to their medical records, even if we think they don't understand that much of it, we have done studies that prove they actually have better outcomes. Sharing knowledge is not a bad thing. So there's some stuff that's been going on the internet in the last 5-10 years or so. Like, this rise of the pseudoscientist is never something that we had to deal with before. And I've been trying to crack this one for years. Why is it that people will trust these people that had no education, no knowledge over us, the people that have all this stuff at our disposal? So you have to kind of look at the story that we've been telling. When we tell clients, don't come to me with that information, like, just put it all away, don't worry about it, I got it, we're starting to fundamentally change this story. And the story that we're starting to tell them is that we're the hero and they're just the sidekick along this journey. And in the meantime, you have other people that are perfectly happy to step into this void. Vani Harry, she's otherwise known as the food babe, had this huge following talking about toxins in your food. She went to the YouTube and started showing these videos of herself like chewing on yoga mats and said that they were basically the same thing as Subway sandwich bread. There's a very popular website called The Truth About Pet Food, where somebody who has no background in nutrition or training has a secret that she wants to share, and people pay to subscribe and get her list of foods that your pet should be eating. What is this? Like, why do people trust them over us? And when you look at the context of the story, it all starts to come together. Because when you look at how these people frame their messaging when they're talking to the internet, they give them the narrative that they want to hear, right? They allow the person who's reading online to be the hero, and they're just the guide who's letting them know all the secrets that we've been keeping from them. People are desperate to find a narrative that allows them to feel empowered. And if we don't do that, we're going to lose that relationship. So this is one of my favorite examples, nutrition. And I don't know, there was an article here about leaky gut or something. And so I don't have the poll enabled, but just think about it, because this is really not a challenging question. If you were to talk to a pseudoscientist and say, hey, look, my cat's been having diarrhea, like hint, the cat actually has lymphoma, let's say that, right? But they take him to a pseudoscientist because they don't want to talk to the veterinarian. What would they blame for this GI disease? Maybe it would be big pet food, maybe big pharma, maybe some vaccine the pet got like 5 or 10 years ago, or all of the above. All of these things have been blamed for every ill that's visited upon our pets. Now let's look at the story that people have been starting to tell about veterinary medicine, right? This has nothing to do with someone's knowledge base. It's all about the story, and it's an incredibly compelling one. So, your hero, the pet owner, has a problem. The problem is the veterinarian. The problem is big pharma, is big pet food. They have made us into the villain in this story. So our hero meets a guide. I call him Captain Coconut. It can be whatever you want. Pick your conspiracy theory of choice. The guide has the answer for them, right? I'm going to give you this plan. You can subscribe to my newsletter. I'm going to sell you some sort of supplement. We're going to take this, rub coconut oil on that mass, and maybe the pet will get better. Maybe the pet will get better despite what this person said. And in that case, great, right? They get all the credit for this thing that they suggested. And maybe the pet won't get better. Maybe the pet dies. But the guy doesn't have to take any responsibility for that. This is a fiendishly clever narrative, because if the pet dies despite what they told them, they can still blame us. Well, clearly, the pet ate kibble at some point in their life, right? He said, yes, well, that was it. I'm so sorry. We tried our best, but that was big pet food's fault. When you find yourself in this position, there's really nothing you can do. Most of us react to these crazy things that we see out there by trying to convince the client that they're wrong. Like we try to win them back with facts. Like, this isn't what it works. This is what you're supposed to be doing. This is what the data says. This is what the studies say. And it's like talking to a brick wall, right? Because they've already decided that they're not going to trust you. You're the villain. Of course you're going to lie. And even if you're telling the truth, you have some sort of nefarious intent in there. I don't trust what you're going to say. You remember when Darth Vader told Luke, I'm your father? That was the truth, right? And it still didn't stop him from being a villain. When you start to look at how we contextualize this story, it explains so much about the struggles that we've been experiencing in veterinary medicine for the last 5 or 6 years. There's a website, I think it's something about like natural holistic care, and they very routinely frame veterinarians as the problem. The veterinarians are the problem for everything. They're out to make a buck off you. And they started selling this course. You can become a certified specialist in advanced canine nutrition for the low price of $395. Now, in the States, we have certified specialists in advanced canine nutrition. They're called diplomates of the American College of Veterinary Nutrition, and it costs a lot more than $395 to do that. Nonetheless, they have this course out there, and this advertisement for it pretty much clicks the entire bingo set here of all the pseudoscience. There's a hidden link, right? They have some secret that your vet is keeping from you. Nutrition is somehow linked to the immune system and toxins and cancer and health. And all you have to do is join this course and you will become the expert. And people love it. They lap it up. People would rather pay $400 and spend 4 weeks of their life taking this course than they would pay $200 for a certified veterinary nutritionist to actually give them the correct answer. It's completely counterintuitive until you look at the narrative, because what they're telling them is, I'm not going to solve it for you. I'm going to help you solve the problem. I'm going to be your guide. So this is what we need to do. We need to understand in this narrative, the client is the expert. And we hate that. As veterinarians, like we want to be the experts so badly, but look, we got to get, that is a word that has ceased to have meaning. If anybody in the world can go on the internet and call themselves an expert in whatever they want, I'm a bulldog expert, I'm a raw food expert, I'm a whatever expert, that word has ceased to have meaning, right? We can find different words, that's fine. The word is not the problem. The relationship is the problem. So let it go. There's 53 words for snow. We can find another word for expert. The client has a problem. You help them solve it. Now, what is the problem that we've been trying to solve? We think that the problem is that there's a sick pet and we're supposed to cure it. But that's not the problem, right? The medicine, the quality of medicine that we provide isn't the problem. It's the best it's ever been, and it's just going to continue to get better and better. If the medicine, if the quality of the care that we were able to provide was the problem, we would be the happiest we'd ever been. Clients would love us. Like, obviously, there is something else going on. And I don't know how it is where you are, but in our town, there's always this really super popular vet, doesn't matter what city you go to, and it's always the one who prescribes prednisone for everything, right? It's not about the quality of the medicine. We are talking about the wrong problem. That is not why people come to us. What do clients really want? What does our hero want when they show up at our veterinary clinic? It's actually pretty simple. They want to be empowered. And in order to be empowered, you need 4 things. In order to get to E, you need A, B, C, and D. Access. Clients want access to information. They don't want to have to funnel everything through you. They're going to access information from other sources, and the information that you have, they don't want to have to wait for you to tell them what it is. They also need brain power. Your clients understand that this is a lot of stuff and they can't process it all. They still need your brains and your help and your guidance in sorting through what all of those things mean. It's got to be convenient. This is a different era right now. People don't want to wait until the next day to know what's going on. Is this an emergency? They want that 24/7 ability to access some sort of guidance. And above all, they want to be the decision makers. They want to be the hero who solves a problem, even if their heroic action was just taking them to you at the right time. When you put all of those things together, that is how you replace yourself back in that narrative where you need to be as the guide in the story. That's the only way you're going to get rid of Captain Coconut, right? You cannot talk your way out of this with logic. You need to empower your clients. So this is what we're looking at, right? This is the story that we have not been telling, that we need to understand in the internet era. Our hero has a problem. Their problem is they have too much information and they don't know what to do with it. They want to be empowered and they don't know how. And that's your job. And in the internet era, we have so many tools at our disposal. We have virtual care and we have the internet and we have these external sources, and all of these things are going to change from year to year. The plan doesn't matter nearly as much as that fundamental relationship. The client has a problem. You help them solve it. And when you do that, you reunite that relationship that's been sort of disintegrating for the last 5-10 years. And if we don't get on board and we don't start doing that, then we're going to continue to lose our role of influence back to the pseudoscientists and the people that are telling them the story that they want to hear. We can do the same thing. We can tell the right story. We just need to figure out how to do that. Now, usually this is where I end this lecture. And the last time that I gave this lecture was in 2019. And, it's very soaring. We're going to look to the future. We have some time to sort of noodle on what this new plan looks like, right? And is so happy and optimistic. I was scheduled to give this talk one time in 2020. It was going to be in Brisbane, Australia, and I was so excited because I'd never been to Brisbane. I had it all ready to go. I scheduled my plane ticket to depart on March 18th, 2020. On March 12th, Tom Hanks, who was in Brisbane at the time, was diagnosed with coronavirus. And as you can tell, that's probably where that story ended. I did not get to go to Australia because, as we were about to find out, we were about to enter a period of interesting times. And I don't mean the good type. 2020 was a bit of a garbage heap, I think, right? For most of us, this was a plot twist, the absolute textbook definition of bad interesting. And it really turned the story of veterinary medicine up, down, around, and upside down, like multiple times over the course of the last 12 months. And what it did above all else is sort of lay bare all of these underlying issues that have been percolating for the last 20 years, things that we thought we would have time to put back together, we had to deal with in a very, very brief amount of time. As Tom mentioned at the beginning, people who didn't care about telemedicine for 3 years all of a sudden started realizing that they had to figure it out. So when we went into lockdown, we started to solve the wrong problem. We thought the problem was we're going to have to figure out a way to diagnose these pets remotely. We're going to have to change the way we practice medicine in order to be able to take care of them without ever having done an in-person physical exam. And the way that we sought to do that was through these video visits. And so we started having these conversations about how do I do a telemedicine exam? And that was a very, very tough sell for most people. Like, even in the middle of a pandemic, you could not convince people that they had to change the way that they did that exam. Right? Now, fortunately for us, that ended up not being an issue because we were able to get the pets to come in. We were still able to see them. And then that whole conversation around telemedicine sort of fizzled away because we thought problem solved, right? But 2020 was not easy for anyone because that's not really the problem. We were talking, again, about the wrong problem. What's the problem? Our problem, as we said, our client is not feeling empowered. They feel very alone, right? They're perfectly happy to come in and bring the pet to you. That was never the problem. The problem is they come in, they drop the pet off, and then they have no idea what's going on. They have no way to access the guide. They can't get in to see you because there's a super long wait. The phones are ringing off the hook and nobody's picking up. They're confused about whether or not they're experiencing an emergency. If they do come in, they're sitting in the parking lot for 2-3 hours because somebody forgot to call them back and tell them what's going on. The problem is that they need access. You cannot be empowered without it. You can't get to E without starting at A. And what's the best way to facilitate it? It's through these virtual care tools. Now, the tools are the least important part of it, but you do need to understand how to apply those tools in order to solve your problem. So I was reading a study that was the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons, and they said at the beginning of the pandemic, 80% of veterinarians were doing remote consults, and that number has dropped down to 50%. People stopped seeing the value in it. And of those people that are still doing remote consults, most of them are using them for existing patients and mostly doing it for triage, talking about prescription refills, and they're framing it as though it's a failure. Like, that's the right thing. That is solving the problem of access. It's all about framing the story in a way that solves the client's problem. If that's how you're using it and that's how you're doing it, that's how we should be doing it all along, right? Empowering the client with access to your guide is the ultimate tool that's going to preserve that veterinarian client trust relationship. So well done. There's one more part to this story. You can go in and talk to veterinarians about virtual care all you want. You can talk to them about the clients and the problems that they're experiencing and how we need to be doing a better job with access. And most vets at this point are looking at you like you're out of your mind, right? Because we are struggling too. Vets are still the hero of your own story, and things are not really going that well for your average veterinarian right now. The stress is the highest it's ever been. The phones are ringing off the hook. You don't have time to see all the pets who want to come in. There's a shortage of people to take care of the pets that need to be seen. And there are so many veterinarians who are sitting at home and they want to be involved, but for whatever reason, childcare or just personal situations, can't come into the clinic and be an in-clinic veterinarian. And all of these things are sort of coming together to create this incredibly stressful moment. And I hate that because I see a way through with virtual care, right? I see a way that we can take these tools and help us do a better job of providing access for ourselves and easing our lives a little bit so that we can be a little bit happier, right? The stakes of veterinary medicine right now could not be higher because we want to like what we do. And a lot of people don't. People are so stressed and despondent right now. And if that's where you are, if you haven't figured out a way to get from that problem to your solution, how can you possibly be a good guide for your clients, right? You don't even like the path that you're on. And that's not fair to ask you to put aside what you're doing and take care of your clients. So this is really, I think, the story of 2021. There's a lot of client things that we need to figure out, but the one thing that it's forced a reckoning on more than anything else is our own story and what we need to do to facilitate all of these people that want to be a part of veterinary medicine to come back and be a part of it and use these tools so that when we go into the clinic, we're not overstressed and overwhelmed and enjoy what we're doing again, because that's what we deserve. That's why all of us get into it, right? So that's what I hope we're going to see. Now, as you know, all good stories end where they begin. So let's go back for a moment to Robert F. Kennedy in 1968. His Day of Affirmation talk also became known as the Ripple of Hope speech because of these words. These are times of danger and uncertainty, but they are also the most creative of any time in the history of mankind. And everyone here will ultimately judge themselves on the effort they have contributed to building a new world and the extent to which their ideals and goals have shaped that effort. Thank you all for listening, and may you live in good, interesting times.
That was brilliant, Jessica. Thank you for that. That was just the narrative arc of the story. Perfect. And I fully agree with you that virtual care presents opportunities for better storytelling and is more about augmenting our existing efforts than it is about replacing any one thing we're already doing. But it doesn't change the fact that the pseudoscientists that you mentioned, they're sort of unregulated. They can break all the rules. They can use every possible source of manipulation, psychological technique that you could ever wish for. How do we combat that? Do we go full on clickbait with our content too, with the stories we're telling?
You know, I always used to joke that I could have retired early if I was willing to sort of be that person and start like a supplement business. But the problem is you always need a foil. You always need a villain. And in order to do that, I would have had to throw my colleagues under the bus. And that's not who we are. You know, that's just not what we're willing to do. And so there are some people that are never going to trust us no matter what. And I think part of our struggle is that we want so badly, because we care about the pets, to get people to see the value in what we do and who we are, there's some people that just can't be helped. And that's really unfortunate because that means we can't help their pets. But to some degree, we have to let that go and focus on the people that want that relationship and then show them how we can have it. And so we talk about that all the time when it comes to branding and messaging. And they say, well, what if my client, what if I offer this virtual care consultation and the person doesn't want to pay for it? And they say, you've been doing it for free. Like, what a great opportunity to get rid of the dead weight. That person was never going to value what you have to offer. And so I think, if you focus on the messaging that gets to the clients that you want, then you don't have to worry so much about the pseudoscientists, right? Because it's all about who they trust. So if they trust you, all you have to say is that that's a bunch of garbage, right? And if they trust that person, that there's not a whole lot that you can do. I don't really like the clickbait stuff because I don't think it's necessary in veterinary medicine. Fundamentally, the story that we're telling and what we have to offer to clients is to help them help their pet because they love them. And that's the same story that the pseudoscientists are telling. It's just the foil that we present isn't another person. It's this overwhelming amount of information. So we don't have to do it.
Yeah, I mean, we have a secret weapon, which is extensive education and lots of facts to back things up. Hey, I think your message there is that it's as much about the audience as it is about the story you're telling. And you're saying that everyone wants to be the hero in their own hero's journey. Do you think there's any difference there across the generations? Does that resonate more with millennials? I'm just thinking of something I read which said millennials want a concierge, whereas the baby boomers want an expert. Or is this just a fundamental human need?
There's a little bit of difference when you sort of look at how people want their doctors to behave. And so some of it's cultural and some of it's age, that paternalistic, I will tell you how you're supposed to do things. And so there's some degree of that, but that's going to end with the boomers are the last ones who really wanted that paternalistic relationship. And so like Gen X and everyone after wants that collaborative relationship. Now, it's not always the same for everyone. If you do ER work, you don't have to spend as much time building this trust relationship, right? They just want to know. But for general practice, this is really, really important. And so, they want to be in charge of driving the bus. And that doesn't mean that your input isn't valuable. Like you just want to be the deciding factor in all of that information in front of them. And that is it's hard to do because we're busy. Like I get that. The last thing you want when you already know what the problem is to deal with this person who's got 15 pages of forum messages that they found and explain to them why that's not good. But that's what people are asking for right now. And that's really where these virtual tools come in. That helps you scale your access and your reach outside of the clinic walls because you don't have time for it when they're in the exam room, right? So you leverage your technicians to be doing client education. You have your website be more robust with your client education resources, and you make it really easy for them to access that trusted information, even if it's not you directly, right? It's your website or other sources that you trust when they're at home in their living room so that they always have you top of mind as the person who knows what they're talking about.
Great point. The storytelling doesn't have to happen in real time, live, in person, in front of you. Yeah, that's a great point. One thing I think about is, we're talking about putting the pet owner front and center here, but what about if it is a fundamental human need to be the hero in your own journey, why should veterinary teams subjugate themselves? They're already feeling put upon, some of them feeling, the problems of burnout and compassion fatigue are very well documented. Where's our place then? How do we find our place in our own personal hero's journey? Yeah,
there is something extraordinarily rewarding about being the guide, and we're not letting ourselves see that. We want to be the one who solves a problem, and when they don't take us up on our plan, we blame ourselves. Like, I just didn't do a good enough job convincing them. And that's the beauty of being the guide, is ultimately, this is not your decision. And you have to stop beating yourself up for these failures that were not on your back to begin with. You guide them the best you can. And if they decide to do the wrong thing, then they decided to do the wrong thing. And that's something that I think is so much harder for veterinarians than it is any other healthcare profession, because of course it's not the client that we see is paying the price in these cases. It's the pet. And that's really, really hard. And so, I don't know what to say to that, except we need to be gentler with ourselves and understand that there is only so much we can do. And for me, sort of finding this space online with Paw Curious in my blog, it was really interesting that I was able to reach more people and forge more relationships with writing a blog than I was in, just going into these exam rooms. And I would have people emailing me from, all over the world saying, my vet said this, and I'm not really sure, like, what do you think? And of course, like, I've got the vet's back. That's what I'm here for, but not everybody else is there. And so finding something that makes you feel empowered. And as a practice owner, you're not just thinking about empowering your clients. Like, it's really important to empower your staff. Like, how many of us have technicians that are like, would kill for the opportunity to be doing client education more, like being a remote technician who gets to do these follow-ups and develop something that they love. You can have your behavior person and your nutrition person. Like, this is a golden opportunity to give people this tool and say, hey, what do you want to do with it? And that, I think, is our key to getting out of this, is empowering ourselves first.
I agree with you 100%. I mean, it's been incredible. These stories that we hear. I did a podcast with Hannah, who's a head nurse at Pennard Vets, and she was talking about how the inpatient updates that they do through PetsApp just put the nurse front and center in the sort of care story. They're going above and beyond. You talked about the difficulty of communicating clinical excellence and differentiating in that regard and telling those kinds of stories. Well, you've got this opportunity to show, we are there monitoring your pet, your family member post-op, and we're there for them through the whole process when you can't be. And here's exactly how we're there. So I think that's great. I've talked before about how I think across the veterinary professions, there can be something of a culture of martyrdom. I mean, in the service of animal welfare. And one of my personal heroes is Diane Fossey, who was literally a martyr to the cause of animal welfare, right? So do you think there's something here where we need to start telling ourselves and each other better, different stories?
Yeah. You can't make yourself the hero, right, all the time. And that's kind of fundamental to all of this. And so that's a very difficult conversation to have with yourself or with other people. Like, why is it so important for me? Like, is it really about the pet, or is there something in me also that I'm really looking to fulfill there? And, you can't be a good leader to everyone around you when you're miserable. Like, there is a big problem. This is true in toxic workplaces. I think almost everybody who's been in practice more than 10 years has some experience with that. And, as an associate or as a technician, if you are in just a miserable environment and you know that you're not going to get empowered, like, you may not be able to change that story. So how do you change your own? How do you take the reins in your career and carve out something different for yourself? And that's a big leap to ask of people. And that is really hard. And so when you talk about our whys, like, for me, that's why I'm so passionate about virtual care, because it was sort of, incidental. I like to write. That's how I started writing a blog. I wasn't thinking about, I'm going to do telehealth and reach people all over the world back in 2009. I didn't want to write. But it opened up this whole world of opportunities. And I think there are so many people who are at home and they feel really dejected because for whatever reason, the clinical work wasn't working out for them. And there's all this talk about a vet shortage, and you're thinking, hey, like, can I do some telework for you? And nobody wants to do it. And it's like, why? Here's your solution. We're going to empower everybody. And so that's, I think, the struggle for all of us who are advocating for telehealth, is helping people understand this is not about medicine. Like, it's never been about the medicine. And when we spend so much time talking about the VCPR and the physical exam and doing remote diagnostics, that's the least important thing we do. That's fine. You could never do a remote diagnosis and still use so much of these virtual care tools.
Yeah, I agree with you. And Clive Elwood's just put in a question here saying, with the hero-villain narrative, do you recognize that clients are sometimes made out as the villains?
That's a big one, isn't it? I think about that a lot, particularly right now when you look at these Facebook groups, and it's created this antagonism where, the client's been, so whiny, like they're just, and they're leaving bad reviews. And we're so in our heads that it's difficult to step back and say, there's some miserable people out there, but a lot of those people are like legitimately, if you're out there for 3 hours, like, maybe we're doing something wrong here. Maybe we're not communicating. And so that's a very difficult thing to mention to vets because, again, they're stressed, they're overwhelmed. And the last thing they want to do is fix the client's journey when their own is messed up. And so I think sort of taking that step back and realizing like, hey, I can make this better. I can make this better for the clients, and then in turn, it's going to make it better for us. Like, I want to solve this overwhelming issue of the phone lines, not only because it's good for the clients, but because my CSRs are so super stressed out. Like, they're going to get yelled at less. Like that's a good thing, right? And so I agree, and it makes me so sad, and I get it, and I understand why we do it because we're stressed and overwhelmed. But at the end of the day, that is just as toxic. If we allow ourselves, to get into that narrative in our heads, we're sunk. Like, you get out of the field if you can't figure a way out of that, because that's not the right relationship. Like, absolutely the wrong thing.
It becomes sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy, doesn't it? It becomes self-reinforcing, and you just fit more and more people into that narrative that you come across. Nevertheless, sometimes we do need to tell hard truths. And what's the difference between storytelling versus sugarcoating? And how do you, I'm thinking there's been on the chat here now, there's been conversations about all the pandemic puppies and the consequences and what's going to happen with people that haven't really thought that through. And how do you tell a hard truth while still respecting the place of the pet owner in the narrative?
I think a lot of that is about sort of preparing people. If you have that trust relationship and people understand your intentions, it is a lot easier to have those conversations. And I think that's why that antagonism idea is so important to recognize, because we think like, hey, they never see it, right? I'm complaining in the back, but they have no idea. It's like, they do. They can tell what you think about them. And so, I think, if we're preparing people ahead of time and being honest, like, hey, things are going to be really hard when you go back. So let's set you up for success. I'm not saying you're a terrible owner. Like, I want you to be successful, and these are things that may happen. And so it's a very fine line to walk, but just like the owner needs to have the right intent, so do we.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I think for a lot of us, we are time pressured, right? And so I think we would love to do what you're saying and what you're advocating for, and tell better stories. And ultimately, that would be better for the patients we serve as well as their owners, and better for us. Let's say we buy into all of that. Old habits die hard, though, right? And what happens if tomorrow morning, in the busy morning consult block, we shut down a Googler? Do you have any tips on how to turn that back around and restore that relationship and get the narrative back on track?
On a whole, or are you talking about just like with one person? Yeah,
just with that one interaction. Once your plot's gone off piste, are you done for? Is that it? Is there no rescuing it?
Well, it depends, right? I mean, sometimes you just, oh man, that person's a done deal. But I talk a lot about how to handle reviews and, what you should handle online and what you shouldn't. These relationships are not built in front of the public. You're never going to resolve an issue with a client in the public reviews. And so that's when you got to pick up the phone. There's a lot we can do with asynchronous technology, absolutely fundamental. But if it's an emotional conversation where you need to repair something, most of the time, right, when you call somebody who's upset, you're just sitting there letting them yell at you for a few minutes. And then they're either going to be happy or they're not. If they vented their piece and you say, I'm really sorry for that, that's your starting point, and maybe it'll get better and maybe it won't. But at least you've given them a chance to vent because they want to tell their story. They want you to know how they're feeling. That's what they want more than anything else. And so, yeah, that's a tough one. And I feel like that's why you should have a practice manager who is not directly involved in patient care have those conversations. It is really not fair to ask a veterinarian to call up someone who just said, you killed my puppy. Like that's really hard to do. And I don't think that that's a reasonable expectation. Like, no wonder we're burned out.
That's great. And just the last question here, Jessica. I was talking to, I don't know if you know Alison Lambert from OnSwitch, and I've always talked about Googling being a positive thing, that someone's taking their time to find out and they want to be informed, right? And Alison would tell me, she taught me that to Google is human. Like, it's not a positive thing, it's not a negative thing, it's just what we do. Like, we do it in the same way that we do a whole load of other things.
Yep.
And she would tell me off for even mentioning Dr. Google. But is there a way to make Google our friend? Is there a way that we can get Google on side and working for us rather than against us?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, that's the worst thing you can do, right? Is be condescending. You see those mugs like Dr. Google doesn't replace my degree. Like, oh, don't do that. Be happy. Be happy that somebody wants to be educated and then do a better job of that. People have a hierarchy of information they trust. Like they just do. Google's actually the bottom. Like, they want the information from you. That is worth more money. They will pay more for it. But you have to be there for them. That's why they end up down there. And so you just got to be there. You got to be there for them. That's how you defeat Dr. Google. Either be there in your clinic in terms of having more access, either asynchronously, email, online, or giving them at least some trusted resources saying, look, if you want to know more about these things, like here's some good websites to start with. Like, that's plenty, but very few people do that. And that's hard to do. Like, I still haven't quite figured out all the trusted resources on the internet, but there's a lot of them. And we're going to do a better job of curating than.
Exactly. I think that's a powerful point. The value proposition of you using your expertise to curate the internet for people value that. And I think sometimes we don't value our own Googling skills. It's like, can you Google it for them and curate the internet for them and just give them a link that tells them what they need to know?
I was trying to do that, and somebody was sending me like an equine page, and I'm looking at I have no idea. Some other equine vets are like, no, don't trust that one. So yeah, like, and even with our own profession, like, there is a hierarchy. That's fine. Being a curator is just as important as having the final answer, especially with the internet. So yeah, maybe we can collaborate on that. We could have our list of curated sites.
Sounds great. And what a wonderful story you've told us today, Jessica. I think that's about the hour. We're about there. So thank you so much for coming on and joining us on the PetsApp webinar series.
Thank you. And thank you for everybody who came along for the story.
Great stuff. And just a note from us at PetsApp that we've got a whole range of events to support you guys. Some family-friendly events, like we have a bake-along this weekend with a bake-off star who is also a vet. We have the PetsApp pub quiz coming up, and we'll have the next installment of the PetsApp webinar series with, I believe that's with Alan Robinson from Vet Dynamics. So hopefully you can join us for some or all of that. And in the meantime, stay safe, stay sane, and try and give yourselves a break with the homeschooling and spend some quality time with the kids, which is what I'm about to go off and do. It's well past bedtime. So cheers, everyone.
You could be larger than life, bigger than the world, living out the hopes and dreams of every boy and every girl. You could fly higher than the sky, shine brighter than the stars. You could have all you ever wanted, shoot the moon and reach for Mars. You know you could. Times are changing everywhere. Do we dream and do we dare? It's up to you. The You could be larger than life, bigger than the world, living out the hopes and dreams of every boy and every girl. You could fly higher than the sky, shine brighter than the stars. You could have all you ever wanted, shoot the moon and reach for Mars. You know you could. Larger, larger than, bigger, bigger than, living hopes and dreams. Every boy and girl, higher, higher than, brighter, brighter than, all you wanted, and you know. Hey, you could be larger than life,